Welcome back to another edition of F1 Brake Check, the podcast that hits the apex of nonsense and the gravel trap of analysis. Today we're talking Spanish Grand Prix chaos, all the latest F1 drama, pundit stumping trivia, and giving you a turn-by-turn of the circuit so technical even the AI sim drivers are confused. So let's do this next on F1 Brake Check.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
Welcome back to F1 Brake Check. My name is Scott Vick. I am one of your intrepid hosts, and with me as always is my pundit for life, my brother in arms, my ride or die, Mr. Corey Broom. Corey, how you doing this week, sir?
Better. I'm getting over cold, flu, whatever it was. Finally, it just took forever. I think I caught something coming back home, and it just I was just wearing thin. So all good now. Pumped up on vitamin C and vitamin D and zinc. So all kinds of goodness, man.
Yeah, you sound a whole lot better than you did last week on
it was
podcast, so.
rough. How about you? How's everything going?
I'm doing well. All things considered, it's been kind of a chaotic week, but making it through. And, not going to lie that I'm actually kind of a little, happy for, a little bit of a reprieve this weekend.
Yeah.
Chance to kind of settle back and not, not be concerned about, practices and qualifying and everything else. So It should be a good weekend.
Yeah. Like you said, a relaxing one.
Yes, exactly. So not having to work.
Yeah.
All right. So shall we jump into it?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. Since 1991, just 30 minutes of Barcelona in the sun-baked hills of Montemelo, one of Formula One's most enduring battlegrounds, has stood the test of time, the Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya. A true temple of speed, precision, and aerodynamic agony. This is not just a racetrack. It's a proving ground, a laboratory, a truth teller. And for over 3 decades, it has separated the contenders from the pretenders. The circuit stretches just over 4.6 kilometers, a lap that blends brutal honesty with high-speed artistry. It's a track that exposes weakness, where tire degradation isn't just a concern, it's a weapon, and it all begins the moment the lights go out. Screaming down the front straight at over 300 kilometers an hour, you slam on the brakes into a tight right-hander, followed immediately by a long sweeping left. This is where first lap chaos lives. Get it right, and you're in the fight. Get it wrong, and you're in the gravel, or have to take to the escape road. Next up, turn 3, a long, never-ending right-hander, full throttle if your car is dialed in, but if not, you'll understeer wide, praying your tires hold on. This is where downforce lives or dies. Turn 4, a medium speed right with a blind entry. Precision is everything. It's not just about speed here. It's about setup, balance, and trust in your rear end. A sharp downhill left makes turn 5 a true brake test. Brake late and pray you don't lock up. Next up, a subtle right kink into a sweeping left. Not much passing here, but plenty of risk. The track tightens and the margins narrow. Turn 8 and 9 are deceptively fast right-handers that demand commitment. Get it right, and you slingshot toward the second DRS zone. At the end of the DRS zone, a heavy braking zone waits, and it's another prime overtaking spot. Dive bombs, lockups, desperation. Turn 11 is a flat-out kink to the right if you're brave. Set up your line for the final sector. A long, uphill right-hander makes up turn 12. Easy to lose traction, easy to lose patience, and the grip fading lap by lap. For years, the slow chicane dulled the ending, but now it's pure speed. Turn 15 is now a fast, sweeping right-hand flick onto the main straight. The car dances, the crowd roars, and the lap ends the way it should, at full throttle, begging for more. Every inch of asphalt here has been tested, not just in races, but in countless preseason testing. Teams know this place like the back of their wind tunnel data sheets, and yet it still finds a way to surprise them. And oh, the battles it has seen. 1991, the inaugural year, a soaked track, a roaring crowd, and Nigel Mansell and Ayrton Senna blasting down the main straight, wheel to wheel, at 300 kilometers an hour, inches apart, sparks flying, a duel for the ages. 1996, Michael Schumacher, in his first year with Ferrari, dances on water in torrential rain to deliver one of the most dominant wet weather drives in F1 history, a masterclass, a warning shot of things to come. 2012, Pastor Maldonado, yes, Maldonado, shockingly holds off Fernando Alonso and Kimi Raikkonen to win for Williams, a win that seemed written in fiction, not fact. 2016, the Silver Arrows Civil War reaches a boiling point. Rosberg and Hamilton collide on lap one, both Mercedes out, and in the chaos, an 18-year-old Max Verstappen takes his first win, becoming the youngest race winner ever. And who could forget 2021, a masterclass in strategy? Lewis Hamilton hunts down Verstappen in the closing laps with a second pit stop gamble that pays off. It's chess, not checkers, and Hamilton plays it beautifully. This isn't just the home of the Spanish Grand Prix. It's the heartbeat of Formula One development, the stage of iconic triumphs, the site of teammate betrayals, and the launch pad of legends. This is Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya.
That is a great history. It's one of those tracks that you just grow to love. There's not too many passing opportunities, but way more than Monaco.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes. You
And
know,
there's
there
really
are a
good
couple
speed.
of prime.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there's a couple of prime spots where, you know, if you get it right, you know, especially at the end of the two DRS
Yep.
zones, you know, if you get it right, you can, as we saw this year, you can make a pass, unlike at Monaco.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and the strategy here, you have to be very much on point. Otherwise, you're going to lose tons and tons of spots. So it's
Yes.
really exciting from that perspective as well.
And because of the tire degradation at
Yep.
this track, because the surface on it it's very grippy, but it's very abrasive to the tires. And so you really, like you just said, you really have to be on, the teams have to really be on their game in order to
100%.
properly, you know, maximize the strategy, you know, along with their race pace and everything. So it's just, you know, like I said, you know, in the history, if you get it right, you're a legend. If you get it wrong, you're you know nowhere. You're off in the weeds.
Yeah. Not getting points.
Okay, so now is the time for my absolute favorite part of the week. So as most of you know, I am a longtime fan of Formula One. Corey has been somewhat more of a newcomer to the sport, although he's been around the sport now for 7 or 8 years. But every week, Corey will take and come up with a series of trivia questions to take and try to stump my gray matter in the segment we call Stump the Pundit. So, Corey, what do you have for me this week?
Well, since I figured we're going to talk a little bit about Max and his driving choices, let's say, I figured why don't we do a question and a trivia on Max Verstappen?
Okay.
All right, I'm sure you'll get probably more than these. I'm hoping to at least get you at least one or two. All right. So in 2022, Max clinched his second world title, but it was anticlimactic, meaning that he won, but there wasn't a whole lot of hoopla around it at first because of what issue, what happened, why was there not, and what racetrack was it?
Oh,
It was his second world title.
yeah.
So going back a
Yes, it
few
was
years.
second world
2022.
title. I'm going to answer the second part of the question in just a second because it's going to take me a few seconds to remember. But the reason why it was anticlimactic was because when he finished, because there was still some, I believe it was some confusion over who set the fastest lap, and when it was determined, I believe that it was Max who set the fastest lap, and because he had that 1 point, extra point for the fastest lap, that's at the point where they realized that, oh, he actually won the championship because at that point everyone else had been mathematically eliminated. And I want to say it was at Austin.
It was actually the Japanese Grand Prix 2022, and it was mostly because two reasons really. Charles Leclerc had a post-race penalty that pushed Verstappen up as champion, and the other one was because the race ended prematurely because of rain, It wasn't they were unsure if it was going to be
Full points or
full
not?
points or not. So
Yes.
those were the
Okay.
two issues.
Okay. So boy, I mean, you got me on that one. I was way off on everything.
What car number does Max Verstappen race under, and what's the reason behind it?
Okay. Well, are you talking about right now? He races under the number one, because he is the world champion and he has that right to run the
Yep.
number one. But under when he loses the championship at the end of this year to either Oscar or Lando, because I'm pretty sure we can say it's a foregone conclusion that he will not be the champion at the end of this season. But we'll see. Right? But anyway, I digress. But under normal circumstances, he races under the number of 33. And I used to know what the significance of the number was, but I do not remember it now.
It's simply because he likes the way 33 looks and sounds. So nothing magical
Very
or
cool.
symbolic behind it. It's just that he likes the way it looks.
He just likes the number. That's awesome.
All right. So Max Verstappen was born in Belgium, but he races under the Dutch flag. Why
Yes,
did he choose to represent the Netherlands?
because his father represented the Netherlands.
Yep, yep. So there's no way I would have gotten that one. All right, let's see. I have one more. And then I have a question right after this because I'm looking at the notes that you didn't cover. Now I wanted to get your opinion on. Max Verstappen made his debut at 17 years old in 2015. Which team did he debut with?
That would be Toro Rosso,
Yeah,
the precursor to AlphaTauri, which later became Racing Bulls.
right, right, exactly. And that's it for Stump the Pundit.
All right, cool.
So I do have one other question for you.
Okay.
So I have an opinion of Nico Rosberg, especially now that he's taking over. He's a pundit now for Sky Sports. I wanted to get your feedback. What do you think about his style and what he's bringing to being a pundit and being in that seat now?
I love it. Because a lot of the pundits, including, I mean, Martin Brundle, don't get me wrong, I love Martin. He is a god among the pundits, as far as that goes and everything,
Mm-hmm.
because he does bring an incredible amount of insight as a former Formula
Yep.
One driver. But like all the rest of them, he has a tendency to be much more of a journalist
Yeah.
style in the fact that he tries to be much more neutral. And I love the fact that Nico, he lays it all out. He does not mince words. If he thinks somebody is acting like a douchebag, he'll call them on it, and he makes no bones about, the animosity that was between him and Hamilton for a number of years. Hamilton's always kind of danced around it a little bit, and he's never, been, but Nico is right in your face with it. And to be perfectly honest with you, I love it, and I find it quite refreshing.
Yeah, I honestly, in his interviews before and some of the other things that I've seen him in, I've always found him to be a little on the pompous side, but that all goes away now that he's in that seat. He is phenomenal. I love listening to him because, like you said, he gives a different perspective from a driver and from a strategist standpoint. So,
Yes.
when they were talking about, towards the end of the race, if Max was going to pit one more time, this is when he just did the second pit for his second set of tires. And Rosberg's like, yeah, of course he's going to pit. He has to. That's part of the strategy. He's on a 3-stop. He knew right, exactly what was happening. And there's many more examples that he's like, no, that's incorrect. This is the reason why they're doing that. Or, when you're going around this turn, you have to have speed and it's just his announcing is awesome. Yeah, I
I
don't know if it could be any better, honestly. So I'm super, super happy with it.
Yeah, I'm super excited about it. I even, before, when he was doing more of the, pit lane,
Mm-hmm.
analysis, even then he was very for lack of a better term, in your face about things.
Yeah,
He didn't mince words. He didn't dance around. If somebody asked him a question, he answered it just as honestly as he could.
sure. Yep, yep.
And sometimes, yeah, it does come off as a little pompous. But like I said, I find it very refreshing.
Oh yeah,
It's like I expect the journalists to be, you know, a little more measured in the way that they present things. I expect, Natalie, and I expect, the other, Crofty, and, I expect, Ted. They're journalists at heart. I
yeah,
expect them to be much more neutral, but I want my pundits, the former racing drivers, I want them to be much more honest and open, and I want them to provide that insight that a driver really does have. And so that's one of the things that, like I said, I mean, it's like I think that definitely, don't get me wrong, I love Jensen, I love Martin, both of them are former drivers. I would like to see them be more like Nico and be in your face with your opinions and stuff as a former driver. Yeah, so let's get into the rest of the news and our recap from this weekend. So once again, the McLaren juggernaut rolls on. Oscar and Lando, led the times. We're at the top of the sheet all weekend long. Qualify 1-2, finish 1-2. And even though Max got around Lando, Lando again didn't have a great start. Max gets around Lando at the first corner, but we all knew that it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that at some point the McLaren was going to get around the Red Bull
yeah,
because in racing trim, the McLaren was just so much stronger than anything that Red Bull or Mercedes could throw at them this weekend. And I don't know how much more we can actually say about just how dominant McLaren is looking this season.
yeah. Exactly. Uh, just there's times where um, Red Bull starts to look like they're getting their mojo back, so to speak. But the next race, literally the next race, McLaren's back on top, and not by a small
Hmm.
margin. It's not wheel to wheel; it's by a very large gap. So
Yes.
whatever the demons that they have are they being Red Bull still have, and it's just for whatever reason it's just not going away. There's a lot that they have to catch up. And as you
Yeah,
alluded
no,
to, we don't know if that's going to be this year or next.
yeah, no, absolutely. So, and it also, despite the changes in the rules on the amount of flex for the front wings, it seems to have made very little difference in the performance of the McLaren.
Yeah, it's surprising, just the McLarens, like we talked on the last podcast, the McLarens look so good that they are. It's either going to be Norris or it's going to be Piastri, 1 and 2.
Yeah, yeah, it
Maybe
is.
1 and 3 if Norris or Piastri does something weird, but they're going to be up there every single
Yeah,
time right now.
yeah,
They definitely
absolutely.
are the team to beat. Whereas in the past, it's
Yes.
always been Red Bull. It's just their upgrades and everything that they're doing is just spot on. Even their strategy, they're calling correctly every single time.
Yes, exactly. The races have just been, I mean, there's been one or two, minor bobbles, but those have been few and far between.
Mm-hmm.
They have executed. They're literally Stella has got them literally firing on all cylinders, if you will. They're not stepping a foot wrong. And the thing is that's even Nico pointed out this weekend
Yeah.
that right now, you see some of that inter-team rivalry where the drivers are butting heads, famously, Nico and Lewis, you
Yeah.
know, um, Senna Prost, things like that. But right now, the McLaren duo are racing each other very hard, but they're doing it very, very cleanly. Even when
Yeah.
they are wheel to wheel, they are giving each other room. They are making sure that they are maximizing the team's points no matter what, and making sure that they still finish in the best position available to maximize their personal points towards the drivers' championship.
Right.
As long as if they continue to do that for the remainder of the season, no matter how tight the race gets, as long as they're still racing each other clean, they're still giving each other room. they just are just an absolute juggernaut that I
Yeah.
don't see anybody being able to catch them at least for the rest of this year.
Yeah, I just don't see how anybody, unless they like had a four DNFs,
Hmm.
which is not likely given the McLaren stability at this point. So I
Yes.
I mean, we can call it early, I guess, again, unless they uh
But, well, I don't want to call it just yet. I'm going to say
yeah,
that it looks like a foregone conclusion, but until we get to the spring,
halfway.
or I'm sorry, until we get to the summer break, I'm
Hmm.
not calling anything. Because you're right, things can change on a dime. As we saw, this weekend and last weekend, we saw Mercedes have some issues with the power units, not, in the McLarens, but we saw Mercedes having some issues with some of the other teams that they provide power units for, having issues with overheating. So we got to, who knows if maybe the Mercedes is running those power units on such a ragged edge that maybe we might see some more DNFs based
Yeah,
around the power units that could cause issues before Mercedes dials it back in order to fix those issues. But we'll see.
yeah, right. Yeah, hopefully
But on
we
that note,
yeah.
for McLaren, Charles Leclerc looked really, really good though, and Ferrari looked, for the most part, they looked really, really solid this morning, or not this morning, this weekend.
Yeah.
And Charles Leclerc winds up, third on the podium. So it was, and Lewis had a really good qualifying. He outqualifies Charles for the second week in a row. But during the race, through some different things that happened, he ends up fading to sixth. But Ferrari looked really, really strong this weekend.
They did. And Lewis initially looked pretty good, but again, it's just whatever's going on with his race engineer, he just is not communicating at all. Something has to change. They either need to get somebody new, they need to change that dude's attitude, whatever that is. It's hurting Lewis at this point. Something's got to be done about this.
If rumors are to believed, it's probably a pretty good chance that if things don't turn around after Canada, after this 2 week break, if the things don't turn around after Canada, there are rumors that Ferrari will make the change, that
They
they're
have
going to
to.
make changes for the race
Yeah.
engineer,
They put
which,
too much time and energy and money into Lewis, bringing Lewis over. So why would you put an engineer that can't do his job? That makes no sense.
well, it's not a matter of, I don't think it's a matter of him not being able to do his job. I just think that he was so used to, working with Carlos that he's having a much, much harder time adjusting to working with Lewis, where, I think Carlos was a little more laid back.
Yeah, most definitely,
I
yeah.
think Lewis is much more hands-on, intense,
Hmm.
in your face type, needs lots and lots of additional data that I don't think signs necessarily needed from the race engineer. That I just think that it's the working relationship, and sometimes just
Yeah, it
the
just
working
doesn't jive.
relationship
Yeah.
just doesn't work.
Yep.
Sometimes people just, they just don't mesh right, and
Yeah.
you just got to make that change. It's nothing
Right.
personal.
Yeah,
It's
certainly.
just it's just that you got to find the
Yep.
people that you can work with well,
And he's
because
not
I
it.
mean,
And he can't do his
you and I
job with
both.
Lewis. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So he could be
Yes,
maybe do
exactly.
he might be a good race engineer for somebody else, but not for Lewis. So with
Yes,
Lewis,
exactly.
that is not the guy for him. He needs to do
Yeah.
somebody else needs to be in that role.
No, absolutely. I agree 100%, 110%. Ferrari is not going to let this languish all season long. That if they do not, if they've got these 2 weeks, before Canada to work on, what they need, that if they can fix it between now and Canada, great. But if at the end of the Canadian weekend, if things are not, improved markedly, I'm sure, I can almost guarantee you that Ferrari will make that change, because
Okay. Yeah.
the other thing too is Freddie's going to do. He knows what he has. He has a seven-time world champion in that seat. He is not going to, if the choice comes down between Lewis or the engineer, he's going to pick Lewis. And
Yeah.
if Lewis says, I need somebody else, Fred's going to install somebody else. He's going to take
Right.
this guy, and I apologize to everyone because I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's going to take the race engineer and he's going to say, okay, we are moving you somewhere else. I mean, he's not going to get fired or anything, but they're going to say, we're going to move you to a different position and we're going to install somebody else who is going to be the voice in Lewis's ear during race weekends. Moving on, Aston Martin. So this weekend, Fernando Alonso finally gets his first points of the season, which, okay, the Aston Martin is not a great car this year. I kind of, can understand why
Mhm.
he's kind of struggled a little bit. But the thing that I have missed, and I have no idea how I've missed this, but how in the world is it that Fernando just now scored
I
his,
know.
his lone point, but Stroll has 14 points? How did I miss this?
It's crazy, isn't it?
It is insane the fact that, all of the up until this last weekend, all of Aston Martin's points have been scored by Lance Stroll, Mr. I can't get out of Q1 in qualifying, but
Crazy.
yet I got all the team's points.
Yeah,
I just I mean, it just makes my head hurt.
I know. Well, if you remember, he Alonso had what, one or two DNFs already, so that's a
Yes,
huge
that
taking.
is a huge
Yeah,
blow.
right, right. But still, I mean, 14 points, that's nothing, that's not shabby
Yeah,
this long into the season.
yes,
Not at
absolutely. I
all.
mean, that
So,
still puts him ahead of a number of other
oh yeah.
drivers,
Yeah. He's what,
so
number
I mean,
12?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, I mean, that still puts him ahead of, a number of drivers. So, I mean, I don't know how I missed it, but I
Yeah,
guess maybe because I
same.
don't ever look down that far down the chart. But, yeah, the fact that he's 12th and has more points than Carlos Sainz, Pierre Gasly, Yuki, Liam Lawson. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. But
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
speaking of Stroll, so this weekend, Stroll qualifies not great, but at least he makes it out of Q1, but then he almost immediately afterwards, he gets out of the car after his Q2 exit, and the team makes the announcement that he is not going to drive in the race and that he's going to be stepping away to go get to get his wrist looked at. So, for those of you who may or may not remember, before the 2023 season, during his off-season training, Stroll had a very gnarly bicycling accident that jacked up his wrist, and he wound up with several screws in his wrist
Yeah.
only a couple weeks before the opening race of the season, and yet he went out and finished in the top 10 on his first race after having this surgery. Well, according to the team, because of some of the residual effects of that surgery, he was experiencing a lot of pain and discomfort, and so he made the decision to, now whether the decision was made by him or made by somebody else, and he was told that he was going to have to, if he was going to continue to drive, that he was going to have to get this fixed. We don't know, but so Aston Martin only ran one car this weekend at Spain, and Stroll steps away, and it's not certain how soon it's going to be before he's back. What's really interesting, though, is in 2 weeks' time, we're in Canada. And then after that, the next race on the schedule, the next race is Austria, which is only 2 weeks after that. But that's also the same weekend as Le Mans. And both of the reserve drivers for Aston Martin are slated to be driving in the 24 hours of Le Mans. So that kind of begs the question of, is if Stroll doesn't come back by then, who takes that seat?
Yeah.
All right, so now put on your tinfoil hat, kids, because here comes Scott's conspiracy. I think that, and this is just purely speculation, I have absolutely nothing to base this on. So please, don't, let me know in the comments what you think. But at the same time, this is just strictly my own observation and what I think might be going on. So I think what is happening is that we are starting to we're starting to see Stroll's for lack of a better term, graceful exit from Aston Martin that we've been talking about since the beginning of the season was going to have to happen. So now he has to have surgery on his wrist. So the recovery doesn't go quite as well. He's out for, a month, maybe a little longer. Dragovich comes in, he drives at Canada, regardless of how, good or how bad Dragovich does in Canada, he's not available by Austria. What kind of power units in the back of the Aston Martin?
Yeah, it's a
It's a Mercedes.
Yeah.
Who's the reserve driver
Yeah,
for
I know. That's why.
Mercedes-Benz?
I know. That's
One
why.
Mr. Valtteri Bottas. Who's to say that this is what Lawrence Stroll has been gunning for all along, that if his son was going to make the exit, he would want another very highly qualified, very fast driver in that seat. And so my prediction is, now I could be completely wrong. Don't get me wrong, like I said before. But here's my prediction that Valtteri Bottas will be in that seat in Austria. And then providing how well Dragovich does in Canada and how well Bottas does in Austria, we might see one of those two suddenly become, Stroll becomes unavailable for the remainder of the season due to his injury, and we see one of those two drivers slot into his spot for the remainder of the season.
That's a good one. I like the Bottas angle, obviously.
Yes.
So that would be awesome, dude. I would love to see that.
Because from everything that I've read about the surgery that Stroll is having on his wrist, that the recovery time, he's not going to be able to come back and drive the car at a high enough level for at least a month, if not longer. And so I really don't think that we're going to see, even if they do bring him back, I don't think that we'll see him before the circus gets to Silverstone in July.
Wow. Yeah, we'll see, man. Let's hope.
Okay.
Keep up the hope.
Sounds good. All right. Cool. All right. So now we have talked about the McLaren juggernaut. We talked about, Max looking strong at times, but then Max has a complete and total meltdown during the race. So quick, recap for those of you who may not have gotten a chance to watch it or only just saw bits and pieces of it. So last safety car comes out. All of the front runners take and pit for new tires. Well, Verstappen had already used up all of his soft and medium tires during the course of the weekend, and the only thing he still had left was one set of brand new hard tires. And that's what the team fitted. He goes back out and realizes he's on the hard tires, and he radios the team and says, "Why did you put these tires on there?" And they told him basically, it's the only tires you had left, so you got to make the most of them. Then after the restart, George Russell takes and attempts to take and go around Verstappen. Verstappen has to doesn't really give him a whole lot of room trying to defend. He ends up having to take to the escape road going through turn 2, comes back out on track ahead of Russell. So the team, assuming that the stewards are going to tell him that he has to give that place back, or that they're going to penalize, Max again for not, dangerous driving or whatever, the team radios Max and tells him, you need to give the place up to Russell. So going into turn 10, Max slows down, Russell starts to go by, and then Max uncharacteristically starts accelerating and intentionally drives into the side of Russell. For this, Max is given a 10-second penalty, which drops him from 5th place down to 10th, and he now has 3 more points on his super license, which puts him 1 point away from getting a race ban.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on the possibility of the race ban, the penalty, and just Max's total meltdown during the closing stages of the race?
Yeah, I mean, so there was contact. George did hit him, which forced him off the track. That's why he took the escape route. So for him being Max, to have to give up that spot, I would be way, way angry about that. I'd be super, super angry, because you have something that George did, and I'm sure he didn't do it intentionally, but he did, pushed him off the road, and now you're telling this driver, hey, now you have to give this place back to this guy that just forced you off the road by hitting you. That would make me mad as well. I'm not defending what Max did, but that call by his team was even Rosberg said that's unbelievable. That should not happen. Now, him going after and attacking Russell after that is uncalled for. I don't care how upset you are. I don't care how mad you are. You have to control your emotions a little bit better than that, especially being an F1 driver and especially being a 4-time champion. That can't happen. So the 10-second penalty, yeah, I agree with it. The other thing that people don't realize is, you're hearing, 10-point or 10-second penalty. That's not that big of a deal, but it is, because now, he has a huge loss of points. He only got 1 point in that. And like you said, he has 3 more points on his super license, which means that he has to go from now all the way until end of June before any of those points expire. If he gets even 1 more point, he gets a race ban, which is basically a DNF. So he gets 0 points. He cannot compete that race. So that even puts him further behind in any championship hopes that he had. And I don't know what that does as far as his exit clause, if that's to be believed. But if he places lower than third, maybe that his exit clause doesn't cover that. So now he's even more in a world of hurt because of this. So it's, superficially, that didn't sound like a whole lot, but when you start diving into the details, that was a very impactful penalty that he had, which I think really serves him right.
Yeah, no, I mean it was a huge thing. And so I'm not forgiving or trying to downplay what Max did. Max, okay, so yes, I kind of agree that, yes, I mean Max was kind of forced off a little bit, but I don't know. It could have played out several different ways, with him taking to the escape road. But then when he's told to give up the place, he's already lost a place on the restart to Charles because Leclerc's got much softer tires, much better grip. Charles is basically able to go around him without hardly any issues whatsoever. He makes a very clean, very strong overtake on Max. So he's already angry about that. He's already angry about the tires. He's already angry about Leclerc's overtake. And then Russell tries to overtake him, and does push him out a little wide. So he's already pissed.
Angry.
And we all know that, Max can be a bit of a hothead at times. There's no denying it. Even Max will admit to it, the fact that he can be a hothead.
Yep.
So he's already steaming under the helmet. And then he's told to give the place up on top of everything else. But what he did in driving into Russell, slowing down like he did, and then driving into Russell, and then, and everything that ensued afterwards, no, I agree with you completely. The penalty was well warranted, and it has dealt a huge blow to his championship hopes. And also, it is going to have to put him on. He's going to have to be on his best behavior for the next, couple weeks at minimum, and if he steps even 1 foot wrong, he's out. We won't see him at Austria. So, which would be another huge blow, not only to Max's championship hopes, but it's a huge blow to the Red Bull team itself because Austria is the home race for the Red Bull team.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
I mean, it's a consequence for your behavior. And like you said, I mean, I don't fault him for his anger. I don't fault him for him being upset and everything like that. Because like you said, the move to the hard tires, in my opinion, was stupid. They should not. I understand that was your last set, but if that's your last set, don't put him on. He had enough tire to go the rest of the race. You did not need to put
he should have just stayed out.
Yeah,
he should have just stayed out and stayed on the mediums that he was already on.
100%. And that would have even put him further ahead of Norris and Piastri.
Yeah.
That call was probably one of the worst ones of Red Bull strategy that I can remember in at least this year.
In a very, very long time.
Yeah. Yes. Stupid call.
Yeah. All right. So On the other side of the garage, though, we had another really disappointing weekend for
Yeah.
Yuki. He just could not seem to get a handle on the car this weekend. He can't even, and I mean last weekend, at Monaco he crashes out, out of qualifying. So, he was pushing the car as hard as he could, so he did not, do well last weekend in Monaco. This week, he finishes Q1, but he is just so far down the chart. He's nowhere. He's off in the weeds and everything. And then, he has, so the team makes a change to his suspension. So he ends up, starting from the pit lane, and the best he's able to do is I think did he finish 12th or 13th? I think he finished, yeah, he ends up
13.
finishing 13. He
Yeah.
finishes for the second week in a row. He finishes out of the points. And, I really had much higher hopes for Yuki once he took over the seat because as you and I both talked about ad nauseum about how much more he deserved that seat over Liam, but I'm starting to think that, Ricardo's curse of the second Red Bull seat is a real thing. And
Yeah.
until Max Verstappen is no longer driving for Red Bull, I don't know that they're ever going to find anyone who can take and race in that seat at the level that
Yeah.
Verstappen does.
Well, the thing is, if Max stops driving for Red Bull, if he goes to Aston or if he goes to Mercedes or what have you, then that frees up Red Bull to actually make a car that's drivable. Right now, they have a car that is designed for Max and really Max only. So anybody else that comes in the car, they're like, well, this is like driving on ice. Well, that's how Max drives. So I don't see how you're going to get around that. And really, after Ricardo, they being Red Bull started putting a lot more energy into fostering and promoting Max. So that's why they are building a car around him and his abilities. I don't see that going away anytime soon. Again, unless Max retires or Max leaves the team.
Yeah, no, completely. So I'm really hope because Yuki has said that his driving style is much more like Verstappen, which is unlike any of his other, Verstappen's number two drivers, that he's had in recent memory. So I really thought Yuki would be able to take this, but it just seems like the more that he sits in that seat, it just seems like the further he's starting to slide back. I mean, I don't know. I'm hoping that maybe this 2 weeks off, maybe Yuki can refocus, work with his engineer, and come back stronger in Canada. But
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, so far he's done as well as everybody else has in that
Yeah,
seat.
I mean,
So
yeah, I mean,
it,
he's still done, but yeah, I mean, he's still done better than most,
yeah,
everyone else who's been in that seat. So, but I mean, but by Red Bull standards, it's still a disappointment. This weekend, we also had a couple of really, surprising point scores in the fact that Nico Hulkenberg comes home an absolutely brilliant. He ends up finishing sixth, but because of Max's penalty, he ends up getting elevated up to fifth place, which was for Sauber, who's been having just an absolutely dreadful year. It was a very big points haul for them. And we also had the the Racing Bulls
yeah,
also looked really, really strong this weekend, as well as did Gasly, after his disappointment at Monaco, looked really good, came away with some points as well. So I mean, really some surprise point scores this weekend.
yeah. It's funny when the junior team is scoring more points in a race than the senior team.
Yes, absolutely.
I enjoy that very much. I think that's funny.
Yeah, no, it was quite surprising actually.
Yeah.
So, all right. So last thing for this week. So Williams had was on the opposite end of the curve and had an absolutely by their standards so far this year was a pretty dreadful weekend. First of all, Carlos Sainz has his worst ever qualifying at his home Grand Prix that ever in Formula One. And then Alex Albon had a decent qualifying, but then ends up losing the fire and winds up with another DNF for the year. So just not a really great weekend for Williams, and it makes me wonder: are we starting to see the first cracks at Williams in the, knowing that they've moved all of their resources over towards next year's car,
Yeah.
or was this just an off weekend?
No, because this is starting to be a little bit more consistent than just one off. Signs has yet to get his grasp underneath that car, and I just I definitely see this as being more the norm than not. Their reliability is going back to Mercedes as well. So Mercedes is having power unit issues. Guess who else is having power unit issues? So we're going to see
Exactly.
that more and more.
Yeah, it seems like the only team that uses Mercedes power plants or power units that's not having problems is McLaren, like we talked about at the top of the
Yep.
news.
Yep.
They seem to be the only ones who are not having issues with it. Even the Works Mercedes team is having issues with the power units at the moment. So
Right.
because we saw it, as we saw with Kimi's Antonelli's retirement during the race, the only other DNF this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I guess we're done.
Yeah, I think we're finished. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right then. So with that, the track is cold. The cars are on the transport and on their way back to home base. Join Corey and I next week when we will have a preview of the action coming to the Great White North. We'll have an all-new biography of another F1 great, and Corey will once again melt my brain with his Stump the Pundit trivia. Until next time, he's Corey. I'm Scott. We are the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.